Share my screen. So for this week, I've already dropped the link into the channel. You will be basically building / working with a web server, and we will still be using the C language for the final week. This week, I was talking to some people. I think overall it's an easier week. The technology behind it is a little bit more complex, but the repo itself and the work that you do should be a little bit easier than the grind of last week. That said, this week is still set up the same as last week in the sense that there is a lot of instruction and a lot of expectation and dependence upon the student to figure out exactly what you need to do and how you're going to implement things based on the repo that you've got here, which has really good documentation and really good links. And then the guided practices will be, or projects will be set up to kind of introduce each day and to give you an idea of what to expect and some of the tools that you may be working with. So overall, for the whole module this week, the rationale is basically getting a peek under the hood, what is going on with web requests and web responses with HTTP. We've worked with those before when we did backend in the web dev portion of the curriculum. But to kind of help you gain confidence in using these technologies or the ability to implement these technologies under the hood, it deserves a little bit, or actually a much closer look at what's going on with the actual server. So basically, we'll just be demystifying what's going on under the hood with these requests and responses with the HTTP, and you'll gain confidence when working in the network world. Also, which directly relates to your repo that I've got open here, it's good practice to work with a code base that's existing. You'll be working with much larger code bases in the real world, out on the job. So this, once again, is good practice for that. And we'll look at some of this code that we've got available to us later on today. You'll also get some additional practice later on in the week. You're going to implement an LRU cache for your web server, so you'll get additional practice in implementing a specific data structure that you're instructed to implement when you do that LRU cache. The takeaways from the week, other than just the rationale of it, is understanding the whys and the hows of networking protocols, including TCP, IP, and HTTP. How a cache can speed things up. We've brushed on caching things before, but we'll go into a lot more detail, and you'll actually be implementing this. And there's some good work both in the repo and in the stretch goals related to that. And you'll also see how a doubly linked list and a hash table, data structures and implementations that we've looked at in the past, can be composed together to get the best of both worlds when building a cache. So kind of an extension on that cache. So overall, you'll get a glimpse under the hood of how the network is working, what's going on behind these requests, and more practice with data structures. I gave you the link. Like I said already, if you wanted to go ahead and look at this link, for day one, it's a 4-day project once again. So for today, you'll need to read over all of this. I'm not going to go through this in any sort of detail right now, but you got some good resources here, and very well written out. I mean, you've got, I wouldn't say clear, but you've got very complete instructions on what you need to do. They can be a bit terse at times, but like I said, that's kind of the idea of working with this repo, just like the repo that we had last week, is being able to handle these type of things on your own. Good practice for the workforce. So for basically steps 1 through 4, part 1, part 2, part 3, and part 4 right here is day 1 and 2, the MVP. If you want to break it down further, part 1, 2, and 3 are MVP for today, and part 4 is MVP for tomorrow. And then we'll get into part 2 itself, which will cover Wednesday and Thursday, and we'll talk about that later. Of course, if you finish all 4, please jump ahead, ask questions related to it, use the resources available, let me know, and we'll get you going on that. Once again, I mean, this is, like I said, basically think of it as part 1 is day 1 and 2, and part 2 is day 3 and 4. But don't let the fact that, kind of like I told, I think, everyone the other week, that Beej looks at MVP for computer science in terms of the entire week and not the way that protocol has us break it down. But just like last week and just like everybody did, you need to stick with it in terms of not putting off the work, because it's quite a bit of work and it's not something you want to be doing at the last minute. So, and we'll talk about the sprint a little bit later on in the week and kind of what's going to be going on with that and what you need to be doing and thinking about through the week to do that. But for now, just concentrate on the repo. You had your pre-class videos today. I'll be posting more videos through the week. Like I was saying earlier in the post, we're not going to do whiteboarding unless somebody particularly wants to do whiteboarding. If anybody wants to do it this week and change your mind from last week, let me know. If only one person wants to do it, I'll be happy to meet you and do that with you. But if you want the extra time to watch the videos and concentrate on the content itself, that's what we're going to do. So for today, you had the networking protocols and the HTTP protocol for pre-class, and sockets was optional. If you didn't watch the sockets, because it's optional, I would go back and watch it. It's real quick. I think it was like 8 minutes or 10 minutes, but hopefully everybody watched all of this. Anybody have any questions about the week or the repo or anything else before we get started with the meat of everything that we've got going today? Everybody good? Cool, cool. All right. So for today, I'm not going to spend too long just talking. There's a lot of resources you can go read if there's something in particular that you're interested in. If you have more questions, more concerns, feel more than free to DM me for a discussion about it. We can meet in one-on-one. If I don't know the answer, I'll find out the answer from Beej. The takeaway from today is what a protocol is and what different protocols are for. So when somebody thinks of a protocol, what do you think of? What comes to mind? The definition or the use? Just simple. It's not a trick or a hard question. What comes to mind when I say the word protocol? Not even with computers, just in general.
Just like a set of rules, basically.
Yeah, set of rules that we're going to follow. Think about, even though they generally aren't spoken of that way, the protocols that humans use to communicate when speaking on the phone. And normally, protocol, no matter what language you're in or what country you're in or whatnot, whether it's business or personal, I am stumbling all over the place with my P's today. Protocol dictates that you answer the phone with a greeting. It might be hello or, whatever it is, but if you just pick up the phone and you stay silent, or you pick up the phone and you say something weird, antelope, that's breaking the typical protocol that has been established for that, and the party that's calling you will be confused. So if you're not seeing the connection of what I'm getting at with this, computer protocols are the same, but there's very little to no leeway, to some leeway, depends on what it is, with these protocols. And the point I'm trying to get across is when we're making these requests, when you're asking for a web page, for example, the web server that you're talking to, that you're communicating with, expects a specific sequence of bytes. And that's all that it will accept. If you give it anything else, it'll get confused. It will kick you off. It'll give you some sort of a weird response. So we've got to follow that protocol. And you notice I said it's expecting a specific sequence of bytes. Everything's sent over the network. Everything that's sent over the internet, everything that's moving through these cables under the ocean from America to Europe and all over the world, everything is just bytes, just like everything with a computer. And you're simply at the lowest level sending zeros and ones. The protocol simply gives it structure. So hopefully from the videos, you have an idea of what I'm speaking of from any past work that you've done with it or examination of it. But basically, all of the communication that we do over the internet, the communication we're doing right now over video conference with Slack, with Zoom, is just bytes being sent across the network, and these protocol give it structure. So kind of an analogy, jumping back to humans, I could send you a string of random letters or words, and it wouldn't make any sense to you. If I took, say I took this sentence that I've highlighted right here, and I just randomly scrambled all the words up, or even better, I just took all the letters and just rearranged them into new words or new nonsensical words and handed it to you, you wouldn't know what the heck I was talking about. So you can think of English or whatever language we're communicating in sort of as the protocol for how these letters, how these words are put together to make sense as our brains know it. And just as we need that to be able to understand what the other person is saying, the server needs that same type of input so that it can give you the output that you're looking for. The network stack itself, and this is where I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail. If somebody's got any specific questions, I'd be glad to field them. Or like I said, we can talk later about them. Q&As with Beej, I need to check with him, but I believe they will be the same this week at 2 o'clock or maybe a little later if he's all stuck in meetings. He's pretty busy as the department head and whatnot, but they should be at 2 o'clock. I will double check with him. In fact, I'm going to send him a message right now, and I'm sure I'll get something back. But I'm guessing it will be at 2 o'clock. And I'll let you know what he says if he answers during this. So the HTTP protocol, Hypertext Transfer Protocol, is simply the way that we deal with web data. The TCP protocol guarantees the data integrity. The IP deals with routing and delivery, and then Ethernet itself deals with sending data on the LAN, on the LAN. So you've got your HTTP, your TCP, your IP, and your Ethernet working together. I called it a protocol stack. It's really not. It's not a stack data structure. It's not a stack how we often think of it in terms of like a technology stack where we're using React and Node and this and that. But they all do work together. The HTTP, the TCP, the IP, and the Ethernet. And we will talk about some of these and demonstrate some of these, both some things just for demonstrative purposes, and we'll talk about what we're using a little bit, and then other things to give you a little bit of a heads up and a lead on what you're going to be needing to use today. Hold on, DJ answered, so let me see what he is saying. Yes, as best I can. So plan on Q&As. at 2 o'clock, but he may be a little late. But they will be held. They just kind of have to bend around his schedule that he unfortunately doesn't have total control over all the time with the other meetings. But like I said last week, they're not mandatory. I can't require anyone to be there, but unless you're ahead with where you should be and 110% confident, I would be in there if I were you. Once again, I can't require that, but I think you saw last week one of the benefits, at least, of being in there was the extensive debugging that he was willing to do, that especially last week with that project that he knows inside and out. He was saying something like he had spent 200 hours of it on that project, but this one as well, he is, of course, excellent with. So I would show up there, especially if you've got any blockers or think you may have some questions or whatnot. So just be on the lookout for that after lunch, and that will be the same as yesterday or last week. So for the IP and routing, the takeaways for this are how computers on the internet are connected, and IP protocol, the internet protocol, routes the data between computers. If I went to the command line, anybody know how I could test if I just wanted to see, hey, can my computer connect to a specific domain, something I could put in real quick? The single word 4-letter command that should be available to all. Anybody? Nothing? You ever seen ping? What's up?
Yeah, ping.
Yeah,
Ping
ping.
IP address.
Yeah, and then we'll just say example.com. And there it is. And all that it's doing each time that we do this is it's just pinging the site that we asked for, and it's giving you the information, the time in milliseconds that it took, where it's coming from, the IP address. Actually, I don't know what that ICMP underscore SEQ is. That must just be the sequence that this ping is working in, because it's incrementing up each time. And then you can just control C out of this. But you can do the same with anything. You could say ping, I think, CNN.com and ping CNN. So there's not much more to that. Everybody should have that available on the command line. The reason I'm specifically stating that is there's something I'm going to demonstrate in a minute that they demonstrated to us when I had it in class, but I didn't know that it did not exist on Mac at this point on the High Sierra or Mojave. So the ping, though, should be built into your CLI. And let's say, okay, we can connect to that. We found that out. We didn't get any errors there. Does anybody remember ever using another command to be able to see the route that it's following? All that data, all those zeros and ones, those packages that are getting broken up and sent everywhere. Anybody remember that command? Trace route. So we could just do the same. Traceroute example.com. And there you got it. And that's actually showing the route. And a lot of times you can get a lot more extensive of a reply than this, depending on what's going on. But once again, you can get that. You can just say traceroute CNN.com. So this just allows you to see how, where you're connecting from and what you're connecting to, the actual route that it's taking. And you can just control C out of that. So not much more we're going to cover on that, but just know those are available. The ping and the trace route. There's some specific uses they can come in handy for, but from now, that's all I'm going to demonstrate. For the HTTP, I was saying before, it's part of the package, and it's the agreed upon language that web clients, otherwise known as browsers, and web servers use to communicate. If you don't speak HTTP to a web server, what's it going to do? It's going to do something specific. May give you a different specific number, but what's it going to do if you don't communicate with it in HTTP?
Return an error, I guess.
Yeah, it's going to give you back an error. Be like trying to talk some foreign language to somebody that didn't understand a word of it. It's just not. They're not going to know what you're talking about. So what I'm going to use here, just for a few more examples, and it's kind of funny when I think of this, because when I think of Telnet, I remember 1999. I was 18 years old, and the first email I ever sent was on Telnet. I was a freshman at University of Houston at the time, and I don't even remember why the heck I needed to send an email, because we didn't even use email at university at that point. That started up a few years later extensively, but Telnet's still alive and well today. It is still available. I think in the current iteration of Windows, and of course all the older Windows, if you go to try to use it on your Mac and you are just using the factory Mac, or you've got Xcode or whatever on there, if you haven't specifically dealt with it, Telnet is no longer available, simply because its uses have diminished, and there's a lot more things like SSH and some other options that are much more up to date and much more useful. That said, Telnet in its simplicity, it's not really used anymore for what it was used for in the past because of security purposes and other reasons, but it's still there and it still has its uses. And today we're going to use it, but just know you can't replicate this on your computer if you don't have it on there. It's not incredibly hard. You can do it with Brew real fast if you use Brew, or you can do it with literally downloading the files and then manipulating them in the command line. If you want it for some reason, Google it. If you want the specific site that I used to put it on a couple days ago, shoot me an email and I'll find it for you. But that said, I just wanted to make it clear that this would not function on just an out-of-the-box Mac, and it wasn't anything you were doing or anything that you were doing wrong. But that said, I've got it installed on mine. If I just said Telnet, www.example.com, and we will say, you have to give it a port, so we will say port 80, which is commonly used by HTTP. It's telling me where it's trying to connect to, and it's connected to www.example.com. So we've got a connection now between them. You can escape out if you want with control, the bracket like it says. Once you're in Telnet, I was a little confused when I was messing with this last week, but I tried to control C out of it. I tried to exit with the parens. You just type quit. It'll get you back out of it and can close the connection. Here's another good example. Let's connect back to it. So we're in here and let's try to talk to it. So it speaks HTTP. I'm going to speak to it in, I don't know, say hola. And you see right here, we got an error. And it closed the connection. So we see if we don't communicate with it. This is on a really basic level, sitting here in the command line doing it, but this is just to demonstrate that if you don't use the correct format, you can and will get an error. But let's say if we tried, make that connection again, got that connection, and let's say we gave it a proper command and we said get http:/1.1. You actually need a blank line at the end, so you just hit Shift Return to come down. And if you hit Enter, connection got closed again. But this time you can see we got a 200. A lot of other information here about the content type, the exact date, the content length, the connection is closed, but what do we see here?
This is returning the website's HTML.
Yeah, it's just returning the HTML. I think I have not tried this, but I don't even know what this. For example, domain. This domain is established to be used for, and if we went back, yeah, there you go, right there, and you just got everything else in the head and whatnot associated with it. So it's just giving you your HTML back. But if we had gone into there, like I said, it showed earlier, and we gave it an improper command, it's going to kick us out with no response, just the same as if you type in the wrong address for something, or you type in a route that's not valid, or whatever, then you're going to get an error for a response. We just did that by hand. Obviously, we don't go in and do something like that by hand often, but we could also write a program to send and receive those bytes instead. Another kind of interesting thing you can do with Telnet. Make the screen bigger. You could actually say Telnet tel.blinklights.nl. What is this?
I think it's Blinken Lights, BLINKEN.
Like that? I was just going off. There we go. And this is actually a full ASCII art rendition of the A New Hope movie. I think it actually said, there it goes. So anyhow, the whole point is you can transmit a lot just messing around with Telnet. And back in the day, before things got a lot more, back in days I can remember, and then even days before that, when the internet truly was in its infancy, this is how things were transmitted. We didn't have all the neat technology and the neat GUI that we do today. But anyhow, you can just, what is it? And then back out of that.
So what was the 80 for again that you put in after?
That's the port.
Okay. And why didn't you have to use it for the other one?
I think, but don't catch me wrong, I think it defaults to that port.
Okay.
But I'm not absolutely positive. It's always preferable to specify a port, but just like a lot of things, there are defaults. That would be a good question for Beej. I'm not 100% sure the answer, but I'm 98% sure it defaults to that port if you don't put the port in. Because, let's see, now I've got this block and everything. If you went back here, and you did the same.
Is anybody able to install Telnet? I can't.
What are you running?
I just did brew and install Telnet and it doesn't work. Hold on.
That's odd. Now, I didn't use Brew. I did it by hand. I've never used Brew, to be honest, but you should be able to install it if you want to. I'll send everybody the link of what I used that worked. And I just literally I went to the web page, I downloaded the file that I needed, then I just accessed the file on the command line and configured it up so that it was just being able to use the Telnet. The place that I was using had instructions where it didn't actually override existing things on the MacBook. So it just gave you the ability to use things that had been deprecated from the OS. But I'll send that link at the end of this. I'm going to have to go back and look for it, but I didn't even think of it to save the link. But it should still be, I should be able to find it. But what I was going to say is if you go in here and you put 80, so that's actually, so now I'm remembering because I didn't, if you put a port, you're just opening a line of communication with that particular domain that you put in. And that's why, because when I put the port, if you saw earlier, I just jammed all this up. Yeah, but if you put this in, you get the result. If you put this in, then you just get that connection.
Jarek, I installed it with Brew and it works. So maybe your Brew is installed incorrectly or something.
Yeah, I'll look at it later, man.
Yeah, Brew, I mean, that's when I went looking for how to install it, I had to dig to figure out how to install it without Brew. Brew seems to be the common way of being able to still install it. So I think it's something going on with your Brew. When you use Brew, does it have times like when you use NPM where you have to override it with sudo or?
Maybe. I'm running a whole bunch of betas on my computer too, so that might be it.
Like when I did this, I just did it by hand. A lot of times I have to use sudo because I use npm all the time, but I know sometimes it just jams up because I don't use the sudo. I didn't have to use it in this case, but I really don't know how the Brew works. But if anything, you could ask Beej about it later on, and he could probably troubleshoot that a heck of a lot better than I could. But, so basically, for your project this week, in a nutshell, and I'll even put it here in the channel, kind of what you're going to be doing. And your repo lays this out pretty well, but what's this? Just ask y'all, if I'm going to set up a server that is going to accept requests and maybe return responses, what's the first thing I've got to do? Once that server is up and running, what does that server have to do? The first thing it's got to do. We've kind of seen this when we were working with Node. We used to see something that would say on port such and such when we ran the server in Node. What do we got to do?
I don't know, Node.
Somebody else came from. You need to listen for. I forget that said that not everybody came out of web the way they do this. So you need to listen for connections is the very first thing you got to do, because to be able to get these requests, the server has to be actively listening for them. So we'll just say you need to start listening for connections. And what I was getting at, when you run a lot of the servers that we've programmed, it'll just say listening on port, whatever you've supplied it or whatever it picks if you don't supply it a port. You're going to start listening for connections. And then when we're listening for connections, eventually we're going to get a connection, just like I did with the ping, or just like I did with the telnet when I was connecting to example.com. So when a new connection arrives, what might we want to do with that connection?
I imagine we want to interpret it, basically.
Yeah.
Or
Well, yeah, there's going to be request data in there. There's going to be some sort of request data, so we need to receive that request. But exactly. You got a little bit ahead of me, so we'll say receive the request data. And then the next thing that we're going to do is parse that data. That's kind of what we'll look at today. The functionality in C that we're going to be doing a little bit of code on actually has nothing directly to do with HTTP or anything of the like. It has to do with manipulating strings. And once we've parsed the request, so we know what they want, what do we got to do then?
we got to send a response.
Yep. But before we send that response, what are we going to have to do?
I guess handle whatever data they sent, right? I don't know what that means. So.
You're going to have to build the response data. You have to put together what all these packets that we talk about that are traveling over the internet on these. You've got to build that data. So we will show a simple example of building that data in code here in a minute in C. So we're going to build the response data. And then after we build it, as you said, we're going to send the response data. And what's the last thing we're going to do? I don't know if you noticed it, but it was happening every time when I was using the telnet in the command line.
I think, do we have to, I don't know, if listen for like when they get, or to see that the other party basically received our response, or?
That is part of it, but what I'm getting at for the purpose of this week is simply closing the connection. So like we were seeing here, when I was saying telnetexample.com, and then I was giving it that info. What did I do? Type something in wrong here? Oh, and there you go. I didn't connect it on, I didn't use port 80, so it wasn't actually allowing me to communicate with it. And you see here, we're telling it, close the connection. Oh, and I didn't put the there. That's what happens when you don't put a blank line. It just sits, and then if you hit return again and it's got that blank line, it does it. You see that last little bit, connection closed by foreign host. Whether you get an error, whether it sends you back what you're looking for, we got to close that out. We'll look at that source code just a little bit after we go over these methods. Did anyone have any questions up to this point of what we've covered? I'm going to actually jump into C and start programming some stuff into C to demonstrate some of these methods here in a second. But did anyone have any questions to the point that we're at? Anything? All right, you can take a 5-minute break. So I've got 33 after the hour, come back at 38 after your hour, and we will continue this. 5 minutes. All right, everybody back? Cool, cool. It's kind of a weird day in Rio de Janeiro. I'm wearing a sweater today, which I don't get cold easily, and most of the time I'm trying to wear as little clothing as possible. I woke up in the middle of the night and it was in the 50s, actually. I was surprised. So, plus it's windy and we keep all the windows open. So this is a kind of a little bit of a treat. It reminds me of Houston. Again, I don't think I've ever felt it this cold here in Rio. Other parts of Brazil I have, but definitely not here. So with your work that you're going to be working on in the repo that we're going to take a little bit more of a look at here in a minute, there's a couple built-in methods in C that I'm going to work through here. And I'll drop these in the channel as usual. So the first one that we've got, I'll just put it, what I'm going to do here is SSCAF. And all we need to do here is include the standard IO. We can say, this is going to be pretending like we are getting a response. This isn't actually doing anything over the network. This is just demonstrating the actual, the method at play, but you'll be able to obviously use this while you're working with the repo. So we'll just have in main void and then that's what So all this is doing is giving us a pointer to a string that is holding this. It is mimicking, like we were using the example.com earlier and the telnet, but that's all this is. You could put anything you want here. What I'm really concentrated on for this example is this piece right here. And we will just name a method and we will arbitrarily assign it 200 bytes. We certainly don't need that because all we're going to be grabbing is this. And we will also say a path. And I don't know, we'll give it the right name. We'll say 8,192. And of course, the semicolons that I always forget. All right. And there's the method. Here is the string that it's receiving. And then we're going to do a format here. And we will save those into method and path. I'll explain more what that's doing after we get an output and show you a few things with it. And then we'll just use our printf that we're used to using and say method. We'll escape out a character, that. And I think, what am I doing wrong here that it's got?
I'm not sure all these quotation marks, like, you have.
Well, I'm trying to escape out right here. Well, you know what? We're just not going to use it. We'll just use a space. That should work.
Why aren't you including the %s and the n in the quotation marks?
That's where I messed up because I'm an idiot.
No.
That's where I
just
messed
thought you were
up.
doing something different.
Nope.
That's all.
Nope. And that's why I wasn't able to do this like I was trying to do because I put the damn quotation mark after that. Thank you. It was kind of bothering me why it wouldn't work, but I just let it go and was just going to leave it without the quotations because it really doesn't matter. So then if I did that. And then that. The path. And that's,
Probably need a closing parenthesis on the both lines then too, right? After the n.
yes. What a mess. So yeah, all I was trying to do was escape this and put parens or quotations around our string formatted method and string formatted path that for some reason and then we can just say return 0 since we have an int. And that should, if we run it, let's see if it does what I'm in the desktops. HCCC extra output HTTP. I named it, and we'll get this from http.c. Worked. And you see our output, the method is get and the path is foobar. Of course, we could have kept on going. All this is doing and all this method, the 101 of what this method is doing is it's looking at that it's got white space or a non-white space character. It's detecting, hey, okay, we've got here and now we've got white space, so this terminates. And then this grabs here. And then we've got white space because it terminates. And if you had done that another time, you should get, we'll just call that example. And we will make a char example with, I don't know, 8,192 again. And If I save that, build again, and you see what it did this time. This time it came to a new line, so it will terminate it. I'd have to go back at the spec and look. It terminates at a new line, white space, or a non-white space character, I believe. But you can see all this is doing is it's going through, and every time that there's a new piece of information that we want, it's grabbing that. So since we only wanted this, we just set up the two variables for an example. Then I wanted this next piece, and we've got the new line, then we grab that. Then if we repeated this again, we would grab this piece, and if we repeated it again, we would grab this, and so on. And the stupid print thing I got stuck up on has nothing to do with the methods. That had to do with my inability to escape characters and properly wrap quotations around things. But does anyone have any questions about this method? Yes?
Yes, so the host, obviously there's space in those next three areas between the end, the line breaks. So is it just it knows that host?
No.
Like it knows that keyword? And
So there is, and I'd have to, you can go back and look in the documentation. There are specific ways for each. Basically, there's ways to override it, but just go look at the man page or go find some documentation that you regularly use online. I like Tutorials Point because it lays it out real quick and clean as far as the parameters, the options, how to format it. It gives it an example. But there is a way to get around that. It's just not. But no, this is just, all this method is, this method has nothing to do with HTTP. This is a string, this is a basic built-in method that's allowing us to scan this stuff, scan this input in. So if you went to here, yeah, white space character, non-white space character, format specifiers. And then you get all your modifiers. Your other arguments. But no, if you did that, and you just did it again, is that right? Is string, new line, next. We have
so
that.
it should only return the word host then
Yeah, it's going to return host with the
colon.
colon. So if we save that, we do that, and then we run it again. Why did it?
We didn't put it in the scan function.
I was going to say, why did it do that?
I think you need one more S.
What's up?
Do you need one more?
Right there.
Yeah, one more S. Yeah.
And yeah, you can see that it got that. And there's a way to escape out of that. It just doesn't come to mind right now, but I'm going to find it after we close this. And I'll post a little something about it in there. And if you have any additional questions, you can ask Beach about it at 2 o'clock today. But generally what this is trying to demonstrate, like I said, this has nothing to do with HTTP in itself. This is simply being able to scan this string, and based on what we've got in this command, and then whatever we decide to do to it, but it's all this command that we're using, and it's in here that you're actually able to additionally add arguments where it can skip over that piece of white space that you're expecting. And these actually get kind of complex because I've seen these before where they have a lot of regex and a lot of other things in them, but kind of the 101 to get you started is that this is a method that you will be using today. And I'll just drop this with all of the stuff that we did. So let's say, thank you, Jarek and Nate, for the help with my C issues I was having. So y'all should have that. And then the other method that I wanted to talk about was sprintf. So what sprintf does in general, it stores everything in a buffer. So it allows us, we were talking about one of the steps here, one of the steps would be to build the response data. And as you'll sort of see, like this is able to do, and you'll be able to see later on when you're actually using it in your independent project. I'll just put that here in a comment, and it's just sprintf. So for this, we'll need, of course, the standard input output. We will also need the string library. Regular int main void. We'll establish a response, and we will make it 500,000 bytes, just in case. And we'll make a pointer to body and make a string that just says, we'll put some HTML in here. So we'll say an H1 hello world. And then we will close that H1. I am just not having a good day when it comes to there. And that. And we will make a length. And we want to get a length for the body. So somebody tell me how we can get that.
I think the function isn't it strl or length, I mean, or len.
Yeah, that's all I was looking for. Okay, and then you will see our sprint F, and it's taking in response, and then we'll be building our response with it. So this is just all text formatted like a response would be. Then we'll have a new line. And we can say content type And have another new line. And then we can say content links. And that's why we had that up here, so we can demonstrate. We'll just use an integer format and a new line. That's why we did this with the string length, just so we can demonstrate actually having a variable in place here and not just outputting a bunch of text. And then we'll just the new line here. We'll have S string, and then what's the last thing we need to do here? This C I'm asking, not.
Well, imagine you're putting the body, right?
Yeah, we're going to have the length variable in the body. And then we just close it out. So then needs to be here. We'll just say print f string format. And the response, and I incorrectly stated this is what it's reading from. This is what it is formatting the response to. This character. Say return 0. If we save that, we can build that again, compile it, and run it. You see right here, we got everything, including the content length, 22, right here. Content length. We got our little fake stuff that we did. And then you see down here as well the body, and we have this pseudo HTML that we created right there. I guess actually, to be a little bit cleaner, we could have done a new line here. Get that out. And that's all we have. So what this allows you to do is, and once again, you can go look at anything you want regarding this, but this is just allowing us in a buffer, like we often use, to build out this response. We're just simply building a string here, and we're building it into response. And then once we have that all, we just have our regular print, and we print response, and we get this formatted message that we included. Anybody have any questions about that? Once again, this has nothing to do with HTTP or anything of the sort. This is kind of 101, 102C that we're just going over some new methods. So just keep in mind, these are going to be two methods that you're going to use, and you're going to have to probably dig a little bit deeper on them. But they are applicable for the day.
That was going to be my question, so perfect.
What's up? What were you going to ask?
Just like what the purpose
point,
of that was, because
because when your server, when your C server that we're going to take a look at the starter code that you've got, when your C server is receiving information, you've got to be able to parse it. So you'll be using the scanf to parse it. You're going to have to figure out exactly how to do that. And it's intentional that we're not including all the information here. It's just giving you some starter ideas on how it works, but it's up to you to figure out exactly how you're going to utilize it. And then you will use the sprint F in the same manner to build the response that you're going to give back to whoever's requesting it. That makes sense?
Sure. But why, like, so the sprint F as opposed to print F, like, why use one over the other?
Repeat the question again.
Like, why would we use the sprint F over print F to just like print a response?
Okay, print, I don't know exactly why it's named. Okay, with down here, right here, this is outputting it to the screen. So this has already been, this is what we get. This, well, this, why didn't I get my new?
So the S print F is putting all of that stuff into the response as opposed to,
This is actually,
correct?
yes, this is printing right here. This print F is printing this and the H1, and I didn't new line it after that. So it's printing all this that we made here. This S print F is building this string right here. Why it's named S print F? It's just sending format. It's taking what we've got here between lines 13 and 20, and it's formatting it the way we're telling it to format it, and it's building it into a string pointed to response.
Gotcha.
It's a low level way of building a string, to put it simply. I don't know why it says there is a print in it, because it does not. You take this line out and you save it, you get nothing. So this is just telling you we're going to build it into here. So here's just the plain text that we're going to give it in a new line. This actually, the way I've got it formatted is just for readability. But remember, unlike Python, C doesn't care about the white space. C is looking for things like the semicolon to end a statement. And then we're just building this here. We're using this variable that we got from the string length and properly formatting that. Of course, giving it the length down here. New line, then we're just giving it the body that we simulated as well with the body and that HTML that we made, giving it a new line, and then just properly referencing those variables. And then once we've got this string all properly formatted together, we're simply asking it to print here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the S print is basically printing all those things to the response variable or char pointer or whatever.
It's giving it this to this so we can print it here. Yes. I don't know why it's named print. I have no clue why the word print is included in that. Maybe Beej knows. I even tried to look because I figured that question would come up, and I didn't find it real readily, so I don't know. But just know that you're going to use this to build your response that you're giving back with your server that you'll be dealing with today. Anybody have any questions? Anything on that? So basically for today, and we're going to go look at that here in a second, you need to inventory all the files you have in your repo. In other words, know what you're dealing with. come up with a plan. Don't just dive into this. This is the same as last week. To me, this isn't near as confusing or as complex as last week. It's dealing with more technology, but there's not so many moving parts as we had last week. And after you went through last week, you're a little bit more comfortable dealing with this sort of thing, given a large set of files and data to deal with, whereas this week is a little more concentrated, but like I said, the technology behind it's a little bit more difficult. And so today you should be getting your D20 route and your 404 working. That should be up to step 3 of part 1. But of course, feel free to move forward to step 4 of part 1 into part 2, whatever you can get done. But this was meant to cover basically steps 1, 2, and 3. So if we go back, get out of this, and we look here. Need to read through all this if you already haven't. Like I said, there's a lot of good links here if you're interested. This describes the main goal of your assignment, and here you need to work with part 1, part 2, and then part 3. And that should be the goal for today. The main files that you need to be looking at, and know also there's a fax here, like there are in many. Beach has built these based on previous questions that were asked. So of course, you're not going to go through and read the response to all of these. It would take quite some time, but you might want to go through and just read the questions once or twice, and that way you'll know if you got an issue that comes up, oh yeah, I saw that in the fax, I know where to go for the answer. So I would strongly encourage everyone to just read over what you've got available once or twice as far as this entire week goes. So you'll know if it sits in here, if you're having a problem. So know that you've got that. I totally forgot to mention that. And then in here, your main files that you're going to be looking at are server.c. And just as usual, you're going to have a lot of starter code, and you're going to have a lot of instructions that are commented out in there in the areas that you need to work. So you've got this code. And then your other one would be cache.c, which will come later in the week. And once again, you've just got a lot of implementation instructions. So for this, as usual, follow your workflow, clone it, get it local, make your PR, add me as a collaborator. Everyone should have my GitHub. It's just John Brunt as usual. And anybody have any questions in general?
So here's a big general question. A web server is just like basically it's just a program that's running on just a computer in some, some warehouse somewhere that's like they have like they like connect computers so they all run the same thing to provide like support. Like how does all that work? Like
in its most simple sense, it's just a server that, yeah, I mean, when you're starting to talk about locations, of course, that gets a lot more complex nowadays. But yeah, it's a server. It could simply be a server sitting in a single server sitting in a warehouse. And if it crashed, then everything's screwed. But yeah, it's a server that is built to, like you're going to built to receive these requests, be able to understand what it's asking, and being able to return what these requests are asking for. And of course, like we talked about, all of these requests are following HTTP protocol, the language of the request, and the way they're being sent over the network involves the TCP, the IP, and the Ethernet itself that we were talking about. But yeah, it's just a server like any other kind of server, but it's specifically being used to process these requests and sending this data. There's a lot more going under the hood going on with these servers in the sense of, okay, I've got this request, now I've got this data, but maybe this data isn't on this specific server, maybe it's on another server, so I've got to grab it and then send it to the person that asked for it. And of course, like I said, it's being broken up into packets, it's being sent as packets, it has to be reassembled on the other end. But in its most basic sense, it's a server that's just handling these requests like we're talking about. Does that answer your question? Or
Yeah. So are those okay? So I don't know if we've ever like talked about like HTTP, like the protocol itself, like in because all of us are from iOS. I don't know if we've talked about like what that is. Is it just those basic lines that you put into Slack, then like just the method, the path, like whatever that third thing is called, and like that's all it is?
well, the HTTP protocol, it's giant. I forget, where is it? Where is it actually? I'm thinking. If you just go look, the HTTP protocol, all it is it is the set of rules, like we were talking about earlier. It's a protocol for how this communication takes place. I mean, what I did was a little bitty example, but there's gets, there's posts, there's puts, all those requests that get made when you are talking to another computer over the web are part of that protocol. That protocol just simply very specifically lays out how everything has to be formatted. Just like if we were speaking in terms of a language, the grammar and the spelling and everything of that language specifically lays out the proper way to use that language if you were to consult a textbook. I know it's not an exact analogy, but the HTTP protocol is just the protocol that's out there that tells us how we need to write, how we need to format things to make requests and to send responses. If you looked up.
So I'm just looking at like Mozilla's like write up about HTTP here, and so it has a method, path, version of the protocol, and then headers.
Okay, so you're in just kind of the 101 on it. The method is going to be like get. So a get is asking, hey, send me something. A post request, another type of request, is actually sending data. You could be posting it into a database, but there's the method is the actual action that you're doing. The get was just one of those methods that we are. I mean, there's delete.
There's delete, there's put, there's post. Yeah, I got that.
There's a lot of them. The most common one are get, put, post. Get, put, post, delete.
Yeah.
Posts are actually the ones I misspoke. Post is actually you're sending the data. Put is altering data in general. Delete, of course, is deleting data. But yeah, the method is simply there's many methods, but those are the most common. And then you were talking, what did you read them in order? That and then the route?
So there's that, then there's the path, then there's the version of the protocol. So that's why the that's the 1.1.
So the path, we were looking right here. So there's your method. It's saying get. Now, we're going to www.example.com, but you know how like then you have a / whatever forward. This is the path right here, the foobar. And then this is
the host is one of the headers, right? So
yeah, the header
connection is the header as well.
Yeah, the header can have all kinds of different types of information in it. The header can have a lot of security information in it. I guess since you've never used Postman,
We've
It
used
just-
Postman, but I mean, like, I don't think we've ever gotten an explanation of. I think we did kind of have to figure it out on our own sometimes, but or in groups. But I don't know if everyone had the same experience. But basically, like the headers, like because we use in iOS, you use all the methods and you have a path,
right.
but you don't necessarily deal with headers all the time. So
Yeah, the headers do. I guess the best way to sum up a header is that a header does not directly. You've got your content that you're sending, whether your content is maybe you're trying to let's say post something. So you're going to have maybe it's a social media post that you're going to make. Your content is actually what you're going to post. The request header, it's not related to the content. It can be everything from, like I said, from security to content length in a post itself to cookies to different security aspects of it. But the header, you don't necessarily even have to have anything in the header. It just depends on what specifically you're doing with the request itself or the response. Does that make sense?
yeah, that's great.
And
Thank you.
Then what you had, your other piece you were asking for. You were talking about the version of the protocol. There you're just seeing that connection closed like we used to close the connection. And then the header is just, we put whatever here. Right here, you've got the actual site that you're going to. Any other questions or any extensions on that question? I'm sorry if I kind of explained it in a roundabout way. I guess I didn't quite understand what you were asking at first, and then
No, that's good. Thanks.
anybody else? All right, well, you've got your repo, you've kind of got an introduction to the week, an overview of the different protocols that we're using, an overview of the methods that you'll be using today. And like I said, each day, just like the previous week, will kind of build on what you're working on in the independent project. Anybody has any questions, don't hesitate to use the channel. Don't hesitate to DM me. I know some of y'all have worked together. Definitely feel free to do that. Q&A will be around 2. This is Monday, so we don't have one-on-ones, but I will be checking in with everybody on DM in the afternoon. So make sure not only to go through the workflow and get me added as a collab, I'll see that on email, but I'll be checking in as well just to see how things are going. And then we'll have Beej around 2. We will have stand-up at 4:15 as usual. And if you get stuck, like I said, spend some time reading through the repo, what it's asking for. Spend time reading steps 1, 2, 3, and 4. I would go ahead and read all 4 steps today for part 1, and spend some time going through, like I said, in the bare minimum, your server.c and your cache.c that are in the source file of the repo. But I would take a glance at everything that's going on here because, like I said, part of this week is, once again, being able to receive a set of instructions and run with it, and being able to deal with existing code and work with it like you will do in the workplace. So I'll be here. I will get the video processed and uploaded. Write down any questions you have for Q&A. And if nobody has anything else, I guess that is that, and I will let y'all go. So get started, enjoy your lunch, and we will see you back this afternoon.
Thanks, John.
Hey, no problem.
Thanks, John.